Well, hi there. I'm Michael Hausam of the Hausam Group at Vista Pacific Realty. So the topic of this video is buyer contingencies here in the residential purchase agreement, the RPA, the purchase contract. So the other night I was sitting down with a couple and we were talking about the contingencies, very important details that are contained in this thing. And I realized that although they were kind of nodding their head, they really didn't understand what the word contingency meant, nor did they understand the importance of what's contained here in this contract. So obviously, I took care of the time to show them exactly what the details were, but I also thought that it would be a really good idea to do a video on the topic. The definition of a contingency for the sake of a real estate contract is simply to this: its validity is subject to the fulfillment of a condition. For example, my doing this video is contingent upon the battery being charged and there being enough data in the card. In the real estate contract, there are contingencies that are built in for the buyer. Contingencies contained in the RPA, for the seller, there are none. For the buyer, there are 4. That's right. Once a seller has signed a contract, there's no way for them to back out of the transaction. For a buyer, on the other hand, there are 4 different contingencies, ways that they can get out of the transaction, conditions that they can build into the offer to give themselves an out if need be. So let's take a look at all 4 of those. Number 1, the loan contingency. This is subject to interest rate and loan approval. Number 2 is appraisal. The contract can be subject to the valuation of the property. Number 3 is a sale of property. For example, if they have another home that they have to sell before they can close escrow on the new one. And number 4, the inspection contingency, giving the buyer the time to adequately evaluate and look at the property. Now, the way the contract is written is that there are specified days that are pre-written into the contract. 17 days contingency for both the loan and the inspection contingencies, and 21 days for the appraisal contingencies. Now, the contract does allow, however, for you to write in a shorter number of days, or you can also eliminate these contingencies altogether. Now, before I get into that, I want to give you a little bit of a history lesson, because for agents that have been in the business a long time, they will remember this. And if you as a buyer haven't bought a house in a few years, this could be an impact for you as well. So here's the history lesson. The old way, there was passive removal of contingencies, and there was an inspection contingency with cause. The new way, it's an active removal of contingencies, and the inspection contingency can be exercised without cause. So what does all of that mean, right? So firstly, the passive contingency, the way it was done in the old days, you'd specify in the contract a certain number of days, and at the end of that period of time, the contingency would drop off automatically. There were no forms to fill out or no notices that needed to be given. Well, they've now changed that to the active contingency. So a buyer actually has to sign and fill out a contingency removal form. Or if you're towards the end or at the very end of that period, the seller can issue a notice to perform requiring the buyer to fill out the contingency removal form. Or there's a clock that starts ticking for 2 days. If the buyer doesn't respond, they're in breach of contract. Now, this actually protects the buyer. They don't have to fill out the form because even after the number of days have elapsed that the contract specified, the contingency stays in place unless either of those 2 forms are filled out. I'm actually in escrow right now with the house, and we actually had that exact same thing happen. We had originally written up a 10-day contingency period. Well, at the end of that contingency period, the buyer had done all their inspections, but the seller hadn't responded to the repair request, but they also hadn't given us a notice to perform. So I advised the buyer to not fill out the removal and wait to see what the seller did. Well, 5 days later, they finally accepted all of our repair requests. And through that 5 days, even though we were outside the 10-day period from the contract, my buyer could have canceled at any time. That's a really important thing to remember. Now, what about the with cause or without cause? In the olden days, you had to give a reason for exercising the contingency. That's the with cause. So you'd have to identify, hey, the roof is shot, or the electrical in the kitchen doesn't work, or there's a crack in the foundation, something like that. Nowadays, you don't have to give any reason whatsoever. As long as you're within that contingency period, you can exercise the contingency, back out of the contract, and you don't have to give a reason. Now, that's really powerful for a buyer, right? You literally could change your mind. You could, my contingency is I don't like the sound that the light switch makes in the kitchen when I turn it on. Something ridiculous like that. So that's really strong. But remember this, for the seller, that's kind of a scary thing because they know, or at least if they're being advised, they know that within that period of time, the buyer could back out, cancel the deal, get all their money back, and give no good reason for doing so. So I always advise my buyers, when utilizing these contingencies, the things that are written into this contract to protect the buyer, to think about it from the seller's perspective if you want to make a strong offer. Because everything that's strong for the buyer is weak for the seller. Have to remember that. Now, if you'd like to talk to me further about these things, or you'd like to hear some of my additional strategies for you as a buyer, please contact me. My number is 949-413-2371. You can also email me, michael@housamgroup.com. Lastly, at the very end of the video here, there's a link to more videos that I've done, the marketplace updates, information for buyers and sellers. There's also a way to subscribe to this channel so you can get notified whenever I put a new one up. Thanks so much and have a great day. You can actually, oh shoot, I missed an important part. Oh, would you do me a favor? Would you turn off the air conditioner and shut that back door?